What I have here is the documented history of Operation Gladio, Italy's branch of a pan-European clandestine apparatus coordinated by NATO's Allied Clandestine Committee and bankrolled by the CIA's black budget machinery. I have congressional testimony. I have Italian parliamentary commission reports from 1990 through 1995. I have declassified memos from the State Department obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. I have the confession of a sitting prime minister delivered on the floor of the Italian Senate. And I have the body count. 17 dead in Milan's Piazza Fontana, December 1969. 8 more in Brescia, 1974. 3 carabinieri blown apart near Gorizia. 12 passengers on the Italicus express train. The bombs weren't planted by Soviet agents or communist agitators. The forensic evidence, traced through court records and commission testimony, leads back to neo-fascist cells armed with explosives from NATO-coordinated stockpiles, protected by Italian military intelligence, financed through channels that vanish into CIA slush funds. The pattern is called the strategy of tension. Bomb civilian targets, blame the left, swing elections rightward, crush the labor movement, consolidate power for the transatlantic syndicate. I've spent too many nights reading these files. What you're about to hear is the result. Names, dates, dollar amounts, kill counts. This isn't entertainment. This is accounting. The war in Europe ended in 1945, but the shadows didn't lift. They just changed shape. The swastika came down in flames, but the apparatchiks in Washington weren't fool enough to think the threat had passed. The Red Army squatted on the eastern horizon, its divisions poised to roll westward at the slightest provocation, or so the brass believed. Italy stood as the front line, a boot-shaped powder keg with factories humming with leftist fervor and partisan fighters still nursing grudges from the resistance. The liberators looked at those workers' halls and saw phantoms, Bolshevik agents, fifth columnists, the red tide rising. Declassified OSS planning documents from 1944 lay it out plain. Before the Reich even surrendered, American intelligence was sketching blueprints for underground resistance networks, stay-behind cells to sabotage any future invader and rally the populace. The Office of Strategic Services, that wartime racket of spies and saboteurs, transitioned into the CIA's predecessor apparatus by 1947, carrying the playbook forward without missing a step. The fears peaked with the Czech coup in February 1948 and the Berlin blockade that summer. The brass convinced themselves Europe needed hidden armies, loyal cells buried in bunkers, armed to the teeth, waiting for the hammer to fall. But here's what the files show about Italy's 1948 elections. According to declassified State Department memos obtained through FOIA, the Popular Front, that alliance of communists and socialists under Palmiro Togliatti, was polling at 31%, strong enough to seize the reins from the Christian Democrats. Washington couldn't stomach it. President Truman, acting on a National Security Council directive, greenlit covert operations to block the Reds by all feasible means. CIA internal memos detail the racket. $10 million funneled through the Office of Policy Coordination to De Gasperi's political machine. Cash for propaganda, voter intimidation. According to Italian electoral records cited in the 1992 Parliamentary Commission on Terrorism, even mafia muscle was deployed to stuff ballots and rough up leftists. The Christian Democrats clawed their way to 48%. Democracy won. That was the headline anyway. Who benefited? The apparatus. Italy was secured as a bulwark. but the methods set a precedent. Stay-behind seeds weren't sown just for invasion defense. They were planted to suppress the left from within, framing them as Soviet puppets to justify every intervention that followed. The core timelines of Gladio operations stretch from the cradle in 1948 to the grave in 1990, a 4-decade shadow war veiled in secrecy. It kicked off with the Western Union's Clandestine Committee in 1948, morphed into NATO's Clandestine Planning Committee by 1951, and solidified under the Allied Clandestine Committee in 1958. Italy's branch took the code name Gladio in 1956, but the network spiderwebbed across the alliance. France's Plan Bleu, dismantled in 1947, only to be reborn as Roosevelt. Belgium's SDRA-8, Norway's ROC, each a node in the same machine. The whole apparatus hummed until 1990, when Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti cracked the lid open in parliamentary testimony, revealing 622 operatives and 127 arms depots across Italian soil. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the structure, the architecture, because these networks didn't run on whispers and goodwill. They required institutional machinery, formal command hierarchies, and most critically, revolving doors with the very extremists they claim to oppose. At the apex, that NATO's Allied Clandestine Committee, that veiled conclave born in 1958, coordinating the stay-behind webs across the alliance, like a puppeteer with invisible strings. Below them, the CIA's Langley operatives orchestrated the whole racket from the ground up, funneling directives and recruits into the European underbelly. British MI6 provided the connective tissue, liaisons and shared intelligence, echoing their wartime OSS arrangements. Then there's the Italian linchpin, CFAR, the military secret service forged in 1949, morphing into SID by 1978. A revolving door of generals and ideologues who turned Rome's bunkers into the epicenter. I have the names. James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's Rome station chief and counterintelligence czar, the man who, according to declassified CIA organizational memos, allegedly intervened to save fascist holdouts like Valerio Borghese from the hangman's noose after the war. Alan Dulles, CIA director through the 50s, who greenlit the foundational pacts. On the Italian side, Defense Minister Paolo Taviani sealed the deals. His memoirs, Politica e Memoria d'Uomo, recount the handshakes and oaths of secrecy. The 1956 pact was pivotal. According to the 1992 Italian Parliamentary Commission report, Taviani entered a secret accord with Dulles and Angleton that formalized Italy's Gladio program. 139 arms caches were stocked with machine guns, explosives, and radios, all buried under CFAR's Special Actions Division, known as SAD, operating through a subsection called Ufficio R. By 1958, Italy was pulled into the Allied Clandestine Committee's orbit. Shape documents from that era, unearthed in the Parallel History Project archives, delineate roles for sabotage cells and guerrilla networks across all member states. But here's where the rot sets in. The revolving doors with neo-fascists. Declassified CFAR files expose the links. Ufficio R recruited operatives from Ordine Nuovo and Avanguardia Nazionale, neo-fascist outfits led by Pino Rauti and Stefano Delle Chiaie. Both men had documented SID ties. Testimony before the 1990 Italian Parliamentary Commission on Terrorism from ex-CFAR officer Antonio De Luca details how these groups provided operational assets, thugs for sabotage exercises. Their memberships overlapped with Gladio's operatives. Organizational charts leaked in 1991 show far-right monarchists and members of the MSI party, the post-war fascist successor party, embedded in command structures. Their fascist pedigrees were whitewashed by CIA vetting procedures. A 1952 Memorandum of Understanding between MI6 and CFAR, referenced in the Italian Commission's 1993 report, outlined joint surveillance of communist cells. MI6 supplied crypto gear for Gladio's radio networks. The ACC held annual reviews to synchronize operations, with CIA funding funneled via CFAR to maintain the arms caches. This wasn't some loose confederation of patriots waiting to resist the Soviets. It was a formalized conspiracy. The ACC didn't just rubber stamp the shadows. It coordinated CIA-orchestrated stay-behinds as a transatlantic syndicate, with Italian military intelligence as the operational arm. A toxic blend of brass hats and far-right thugs welded into a weaponized fraternity.
The machine doesn't tick without fuel. Gladio's shadows ran on a pipeline of phantom dollars, slush funds funneled through the cracks of official denials. The official story painted these stay-behind networks as lean operations, defensive whispers against the Soviet bear. The ledgers tell a different tale. Rivers of untraceable cash, black box allocations from congressional appropriations, all vanishing into European bunkers. The Church Committee findings from 1975, that congressional hammer on covert operations, reveal the blueprint. The CIA's fiscal year allocations for paramilitary activities in Europe ballooned after 1947. Office of Policy coordination budgets hit tens of millions by 1950, funneled through unvouchered accounts. No receipts, no questions. Declassified memos from CIA file number RDP-80R-1731R-0032-002013-5, released through FOIA, detail OPC's pipeline to Italy. From 1948 onward, wire transfers disguised as economic aid routed approximately $5 million annually to CFAR per National Security Archive reconstructions. That money armed stay-behinds with everything from radios to explosives. Congressional funding records corroborate the flow. The 1949 Mutual Defense Assistance Act, that appropriations behemoth, hid slush funds in special projects. Church Committee testimony from CIA Budget Chief William Colby admitted the oversight gaps. His words, funds were allowed to vanish into offshore accounts for European networks like Gladio. The arms shipments delivered hard. Leaked CFAR documents map 127 depots stocked via covert U.S. consignments, machine guns, TNT, plastic explosives, shipped from Fort Bragg crates, buried in Alpine readouts by 1956. Declassified Defense Intelligence Agency files from 1991, obtained through FOIA case F-2013-14500, exposed the logistics. CIA organized shipments via Mediterranean routes, evading customs under NATO cover. Ex-OPC officer Thomas Polgar testified before the 1990 Italian commissions about these arrangements. Now the deeper mechanisms. Vatican and corporate tributaries feeding the main vein. Vatican financial records, declassified in parallel to Operation Condor investigations, reveal anti-communist pipelines running through the Holy See. According to Paul Williams' archival work, drawing on FOIA releases, funds were funneled through the Institute for Religious Works, the IOR, the Vatican's bank, via offshore accounts to CIA intermediaries. Testimony from CIA Financial Administrator Richard Helms in Church Committee sessions hints at the arrangement. Vatican liaisons coordinated what were called humanitarian wire transfers. The money armed Italian cells. Corporate routes, shell companies, and front organizations. Declassified OPC memos show outfits like the Congress for Cultural Freedom, bankrolled by CIA black budgets via Rockefeller Foundation proxies, channeled funds to Italian operations. Italian banking probes during the 1992 Commission hearings uncovered flows from U.S. multinationals like Fiat, masking arms purchases as industrial aid. The key finding from the declassified CIA documents released under the 2006 Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, as cited in Black Vault archives, over $20 million funneled to Gladio by 1960, wire transferred via offshore Vatican-linked accounts, arming 622 operatives with U.S.-sourced arsenals. Church committee testimony from budget overseers confirms the bypass. No congressional line item vetoes, just black box approvals under national security. These funds weren't abstract ink on paper. They enabled what came next. The strategy of tension wasn't some fever dream of the paranoid. It was the machine's cold calculus, a deliberate racket of manufactured mayhem designed to strangle the Italian left in its cradle, while the apparatus feigned shock at the carnage. The pattern defined itself in the late 60s, a wave of bombings, assassinations, and frame jobs pinned on communists and anarchists. Each blast a calculated prod to swing public dread toward the right, consolidating power for the Christian Democrat syndicate and their transatlantic backers. Short, savage strikes on civilian hubs, banks, trains, public squares. Kill innocents to sow chaos. Then the fix. Arrests of left-wing patsies. Media whispers of Bolshevik plots. Crackdowns that neutered unions and parties. The official story? Lone wolves, red radicals run amok. The documented reality? Coordination. CIA, NATO directives echoing Field Manual FM 30-31B's false flag tactics, where violence is encouraged to justify the state's iron fist. Let's trace the blood, bombing by bombing. December 12th, 1969, Milan, Piazza Fontana, a Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock. A bomb, 5 kilograms of ANFO, explosive, military-grade gelignite packed into a briefcase, ripped through the Banca Nazionale dell'Agricoltura's ground floor. 17 dead on the spot, 88 maimed. The air thick with screams and acrid smoke as rescuers clawed through the debris. Bombing records from the Milan prosecutor's archives detail the horror. Shrapnel carved paths through flesh, the blast's epicenter in the bank's lobby. And then the frame job. Giuseppe Pinelli, an anarchist railway worker, was arrested within hours. 3 days later, he fell from a 4th-floor window of Milan police headquarters during interrogation. The official verdict? Suicide. The autopsy discrepancies, bruises suggesting foul play, were buried. Another anarchist, Pietro Valpreda, was arrested and held for 3 years before trial. His confession extracted under duress per trial transcripts. He was eventually acquitted. Forensic analysis from the 2001 Milan court trials traces the gelignite to Italian military stockpiles, the kind cached in Gladio's depots. 4 days after Piazza Fontana, December 15th, 3 more bombs detonated in Rome. One at the altar of the fatherland, another near the Banca Nazionale del Lavoro, a third at the Banca Commerciale Italiana. 16 wounded. The pattern was clear.
symbolic strikes on state and finance, all falsely attributed to left-wing agitators. Italian judicial records from the Brescia trials in 1974 document the coordination. Neo-fascist cells from Ordine Nuovo supplied the timers and fuses. Their meetings were logged in SID surveillance reports leaked to the 1992 Parliamentary Commission on Terrorism. Witness testimony from Carlo Di Giulio, and Gladio-linked explosive expert before that commission in 1991, admits he handled C4 from U.S.-sourced caches for exercises that mirrored the bombing techniques. May 31st, 1972, the Peteano ambush near Gorizia, a car bomb on a road used by Carabinieri. 3 officers killed in a hail of nails and dynamite. Bombing logs from the Venice prosecutor's office show the explosive residue matching Gladio's sabotage kits, plastic explosives from Sardinian training camps, per testimony from General Gerardo Serravalle, who commanded Italian Gladio from 1971 to 1974. The false attribution came swift and savage. The PCI was blamed. Media headlines screamed "Red Terrorism," despite forensic ties to neo-fascist Marco Pozzan, who fled with SID assistance. May 28, 1974, Brescia, Piazza della Loggia, a time bomb in a trash bin erupted amid anti-fascist chants. 8 dead, 94 wounded. The dead included a trade union leader. Court records from the 1988 Brescia trial link the T4 explosive to Ordine Nuovo's arsenal, stocked via Gladio's Ufficio R. Ex-operative Martino Siciliano testified to this arrangement in 1993 parliamentary sessions. The frame? Anarchists and communists rounded up, while the real bombers, neo-fascists like Giovanni Meli, walked free under protection. August 4, 1974, the Italicus Express train derailed near Bologna after a suitcase bomb killed 12 and wounded 48. Forensic reports from the 2003 appeals court cite gelignite identical to Gladio caches. Witness accounts describe SID agents shadowing the plotters. Declassified CFAR files on strategy of tension operations detail what they called nuclei di resistenza, clandestine resistance nuclei, blending military intelligence with far-right cells. This is per Prime Minister Andreotti's 1990 admission before the Parliamentary Commission. Journalistic accounts from the era, published in El Europeo magazine and drawing on leaked SID documents, exposed the pact. CIA funds via black budgets arming extremists. NATO's ACC greenlighting tension to crush the left. Each blast followed by arrests of PCI sympathizers. Media plants from the apparatus blaming anarcho-Maoists. The Pinelli case, the Valpreda frame-up, autopsy discrepancies buried. The gut punch revelation from the declassified forensic reports corroborated by the 1992 Parliamentary Commission Report 1. Gladio supplied bombs killed dozens in Italy's strategy of tension. Each explosion a frame job on leftists to swing elections. Andreotti's own words before the Terrorism Commission in 1990. Gladio deviated into domestic terrorism. 70-plus dead across the sequence, not defense against the Soviets, offensive war on democracy. Gladio's fingerprints in every crater. The walls of secrecy don't crumble easy, but when they do, the confessions come tumbling out like rats from a sinking ship. It started with Judge Felice Casson in 1984, investigating the 1972 Peteano car bombing.
he began pulling threads that unraveled the entire apparatus. By 1990, his findings in the Venetian prosecutor's archives detailed how Saifar had buried evidence for years. Testimony from Vincenzo Vinciguerra, a neo-fascist serving a life sentence for the Peteano bombing, provided the confession. Gladio was used for terrorism against the state. His words on the record before the 1990 Commission on Terrorism. Then came the thunderclap. August 3rd, 1990, Prime Minister Andreotti stood before the Italian Senate and delivered an admission that shattered decades of denials. You know, gentlemen, that a clandestine organization, a secret organization, linked to NATO existed in Italy. Per the official Senate transcript, Andreotti confirmed Gladio's birth in 1956 under Saifar auspices. He submitted a 10-page report that same day, the so-called parallel SID, the Gladio case, dissecting how the stay-behind network had morphed into a tool for domestic subversion. SID's Ufficio D, coordinating neo-fascist cells. The Italian parliamentary commissions from 1990 to 1995 were the anvil. Two key bodies, the Commission on Terrorism and the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into the Deviation and Misuse of the SID, churned out thousands of pages of testimony. General Paolo Inzarelli, who commanded Italian Gladio from 1974 to 1986, deposed on the network's operations. He admitted NATO oversight via the Allied Clandestine Committee, but denied terror links. The transcripts show him squirming on arms accountability. Admiral Fulvio Martini of SIMSI testified to the service's parallel structures. Carlo Di Giulio confessed to handling explosives from Gladio caches. U.S. FOIA case F-1992-00549, released by the State Department, yields memos on information concerning paramilitary organization called Operation Gladio. The documents confirm CIA's role in European stay-behinds, liaison pacts detailed, terror specifics redacted. CIA official statements after 1990, damage control. A November 14, 1990 Washington Post report quotes agency spokesman acknowledging stay-behind networks for invasion defense, but flatly denying terrorism. We had nothing to do with bombings, per CIA Director William Webster's statement to congressional overseers. Yet FOIA pursuits beyond 1992, including documents in the Black Vault archives, exposed memos contradicting the official line. Memos naming handlers like James Angleton in Italian operations. The revelation cuts deep. These admissions confirmed Gladio's pivot to terror. Transcripts naming CIA handlers as the puppet masters. Defensive phantoms turned into offensive daggers. Vinciguerra's confession seals it. Gladio carried out bombings to blame the left. The official story crumbled. Reality exposed a named conspiracy. Handlers identified. Terror's role admitted. But the full scope remained in redactions. The walls of secrecy don't crumble easy, but when they do, the confessions come tumbling out like rats from a sinking ship. It started with Judge Felice Casson in 1984, investigating the 1972 Peteano car bombing. He began pulling threads that unraveled the entire apparatus. By 1990, his findings in the Venetian prosecutor's archives detailed how Saifar had buried evidence for years. Testimony from Vincenzo Vinciguerra, a neo-fascist serving a life sentence for the Peteano bombing, provided the confession.
Gladio was used for terrorism against the state. His words on the record before the 1990 Commission on Terrorism. Then came the thunderclap. August 3rd, 1990, Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti stood before the Italian Senate and delivered an admission that shattered decades of denials. You know, gentlemen, that a clandestine organization, a secret organization linked to NATO, existed in Italy. Per the official Senate transcript, Andreotti confirmed Gladio's birth in 1956 under CIFAR auspices. He submitted a 10-page report that same day, the so-called parallel SID, the Gladio case, dissecting how the stay-behind network had morphed into a tool for domestic subversion. SID's Ufficio D, coordinating neo-fascist cells. The Italian parliamentary commissions from 1990 to 1995 were the anvil. Two key bodies, the Commission on Terrorism and the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into the deviation and misuse of the SID, churned out thousands of pages of testimony. General Paolo Inzerilli, who commanded Italian Gladio from 1974 to 1986, deposed on the network's operations. He admitted NATO oversight via the Allied Clandestine Committee, but denied terror links. The transcripts show him squirming on arms accountability. Admiral Fulvio Martini of SIMI testified to the service's parallel structures. Carlo Tigilio confessed to handling explosives from Gladio caches. U.S. FOIA case F-1992-00549, released by the State Department, yields memos on information concerning paramilitary organization called Operation Gladio. The documents confirm CIA's role in European stay-behinds, liaison pacts detailed, terror specifics redacted. CIA official statements after 1990, damage control. A November 14, 1990 Washington Post report quotes agency spokesman acknowledging stay-behind networks for invasion defense, but flatly denying terrorism. We had nothing to do with bombings, per CIA Director William Webster's statement to congressional overseers. Yet FOIA pursuits beyond 1992, including documents in the Black Vault archives, expose memos contradicting the official line, memos naming handlers like James Angleton in Italian operations. The revelation cuts deep. These admissions confirmed Gladio's pivot to terror. Transcripts naming CIA handlers as the puppet masters. Defensive phantoms turned into offensive daggers. Vinciguerra's confession seals it. Gladio carried out bombings to blame the left. The official story crumbled. Reality exposed a named conspiracy. Handlers identified. Terror's role admitted. But the full scope remained hidden in reductions. The veils didn't descend by accident. They were woven tight by the syndicate's own hand. Suppression tactics shrouded Gladio in classified fog for 4 decades, while bodies piled up in Italy's piazzas. Sealed records under national security pretexts, media blackouts enforced through apparatus pressure, redacted FOIA pursuits that dribbled out just enough to tease without revealing the full racket. NATO's Allied Clandestine Committee protocols, detailed in declassified shape memos from the 1950s, mandated eternal secrecy under defense clauses, extended to domestic subversion to evade parliamentary oversight.
The European Parliament passed a resolution on November 22, 1990, a fiery condemnation of what they called clandestine structures. They demanded full disclosure. NATO's response: stone silence, archived in EU proceedings. Media blackouts formed the outer veil. Pre-1990 coverage was a drip, limited to Italian investigative pieces and outlets like Panorama magazine in the late 70s, probing SID deviations. But those were quashed by apparatus leaks and threats per whistleblower accounts documented in Daniel A. Ganser's archival studies, drawing on commission testimonies. Transatlantic press, near total silence. U.S. dailies like the New York Times ignored the story until Andreotti's speech forced their hand. British broadsheets buried hints under Cold War spin. FOIA pursuits proved a racket of redactions. U.S. CIA internal memos on funding and coordination, released in 1992 through State Department case F-1992-00545, detail paramilitary setups, but black out terror links. Further pursuits yielded the 2006 Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act releases, 20 documents confirming stay-behind arms flows to Italy, yet redacted on strategy of tension specifics. Ganser's 2000 FOIA request was denied outright. The agency cited no responsive records, a lie exposed by later leaks. Intelligence reports documenting operations exist in fragments. The 1959 CFAR file maps nuclea de resistenza for psychological operations. CIA's OPC memos from the 1940s, compiled in National Security Archive collections, outline anti-communist funding. NATO's clandestine planning committee directives, unearthed in the Parallel History Project, coordinate the European web. The key finding emerges from the smoke. Decades of denials protected the strategy of tension blueprint, a manufactured consent template where Italy's false flags, Piazza Fontana's 17 dead, Peteano's carnage, served as NATO's laboratory for engineering public dread. Why the classification? Per NATO's 1958 ACC protocols archived its shape, secrecy was justified as operational integrity, but transcripts from the 1990 Italian commissions revealed the truth. Denials from Washington and London buried the terror connection for decades. The 1992 Parliamentary Report 1 documents false flags explicitly. Gladio caches supplied gelignite for blasts blamed on Reds. Elections swung rightward in 1974. Leftists jailed en masse. This wasn't aberration. This was blueprint. Decades of sealed records ensured the machinery's patterns endured. Power consolidated through fear's alchemy. Financial control unchecked. Conspiracies veil intact until controlled leaks diluted what should have been a dam burst of truth. And so the case closes. From post-war phantoms to 1990 confessions. From black budget veins pumping CIA dollars into Alpine bunkers to the blood pooling in Italian piazzas. NATO's Allied Clandestine Committee coordinating the web to neo-fascist thugs planting the bombs and walking free. The pattern repeats itself across the evidence. Stay-behind networks built under the guise of Soviet defense, transformed into domestic terror apparatus, funded by untraceable dollars, armed with military-grade explosives, staffed by far-right operatives vetted by Langley, protected by classification until a weary prime minister cracked the lid in a moment of exhausted confession. 17 dead in Piazza Fontana, 8 in Brescia, 12 on the Italicus Express, and the left-wing patsies hauled off to prison cells while the real bombers enjoyed SID protection.
Who benefited? The apparatus, the transatlantic syndicate, the Christian Democrat machine and their backers in Washington and London. Every bomb that went off pushed the Italian electorate further from the communists. Every frame job justified another crackdown. Every classified memo ensured the machinery kept running without public scrutiny. The European Parliament condemned it in 1990. NATO responded with silence. The CIA admitted to stay behind networks, but denied the terror. The redactions continue. The full ledger remains hidden. Italy wasn't the outlier. It was the proof of concept, the laboratory where the strategy of tension was tested and refined, where false flag operations became doctrine, where manufactured consent through coordinated dread became the operating manual. The Cold War ended. The machinery didn't. The money moved. The players changed names. The patterns persist. They always do. This tape goes into the archive now. Whoever finds it, do what you will. The evidence speaks for itself. The truth endures if we listen.